Most Westerners are not aware of this, but there is a major era-defining shift happening in the Middle East right now. Iran's power in the region has diminished greatly over the last year or so, and Turkey and its proxies are now acting on their plans to possibly restore the Islamic Caliphate that collapsed 100 years ago. The reason this shift is so significant is that there is a strong argument to be made from the Bible that the empire of the Antichrist, the Beast Empire, will be a restored Islamic Caliphate based in modern-day Turkey. Hey friends, Tim Hostetter here on Road to Zion. Now, obviously it's important not to be overly dogmatic when it comes to theories about the end times. We've all heard our fair share of sensational, attention-grabbing end-time predictions, and if you're anything like me, you probably have some prophecy hype fatigue. But what's different about this theory is that it wasn't formed in reaction to news that already happened. It was formed through a careful study of Scripture and has accurately predicted some major changes in the Middle East, changes that are happening right now. So while I won't be dogmatic about this theory, it's definitely worth paying attention to if you are someone seeking to follow Jesus' command, to watch and pray. When you're done with this video, you should have a basic understanding of the biblical argument for a Turkish-led beast empire, as well as an understanding of the relevant changes happening in the Middle East that may be preparing for that empire right now. Let's start with the Bible. There are a lot of prophecies in the Bible about a last days battle in which Israel's enemies gather together to attack her. Israel's ancient prophets say that it will be during this great time of distress that God's presence will return to Jerusalem to judge those nations and rescue Israel. In other words, it's the battle of Armageddon and the return of Jesus. For example, Zechariah 14 verses 2 and 3 and Joel 3 verse 2. But who in particular are these nations that will come against Israel in the last days? If we could identify them, we could have a better idea of which nations will be part of that last days beast empire. Is it China, Russia, the European Union, the United States? Maybe so. But despite the interesting theories floating around on the internet, the Bible never says anything explicit about those nations. But the Bible does get explicit about which nations will be attacking Israel in the last days and coming under God's judgment because of it. So let's make sure we know who those nations are. Here are some of the nations that the Bible repeatedly calls out by name for judgment in the last days. Edom, that's in modern-day Jordan. Moab, also in modern-day Jordan. Egypt. Cush, that's Sudan or Ethiopia. Assyria, that's parts of modern-day Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Turkey, Arabia, and Libya. Did you notice a theme here? These are all Middle Eastern and North African countries that geographically surround the nation of Israel. These nations appear in many passages about God's end-time judgment, but I want to show you a couple passages that actually name a lot of these nations all together in just a couple verses. First up is Zephaniah 2, verse 9, verse 12, and verse 13. Here's what it says. Therefore, as I live, declares the Lord of armies, the God of Israel, Moab will assuredly be like Sodom, and the sons of Ammon like Gomorrah, ground overgrown with weeds and full of salt mines, and a permanent desolation. The remnant of my people will plunder them, and the remainder of my nation will inherit them. You also, Cush, will be slain by the sword, and he will stretch out his hand against the north and eliminate Assyria. And he will make Nineveh a desolation, parched like the wilderness. Now look at this, Ezekiel chapter 30, verses 2 to 5. Wail, woe for the day is near. Indeed, the day of the Lord is near, and it will be a day of clouds, a time of doom for the nations. A sword will come upon Egypt, and there will be trembling in Cush. When the slain fall in Egypt, they will take away her wealth, and her foundations will be torn down. Cush, Put, Lud, all of which are in North Africa. All Arabia, Libya, and the people of the land that is in league will fall with them by the sword. Passages like these make it clear that in the time of judgment, at the return of Jesus, God's judgment will fall on the Middle Eastern and North African nations who form a military alliance to fight against God's people, Israel. But does the Bible give any clues as to who the leader of this League of Nations or this alliance of nations is going to be? Let's take a look at Ezekiel 38, which names Gog as the leader of a great Middle Eastern and North African alliance that attacks Israel in the last days. Which nation is Gog from? Ezekiel 38 verse 2 calls him the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Meshech and Tubal, both of which are in modern-day Turkey. Without getting too far into the weeds here, I'll just say that verses 17 to 23, as well as the whole of chapter 39, make it clear that Gog is another name for the Antichrist or anti-Messiah, and that the war described is the final war culminating in the return of Yeshua and the day of judgment. If this understanding of Ezekiel 38 is correct, that would mean that Turkey is currently the most likely candidate to lead the anti-Messiah's empire against Israel in the last days. But a lot of people are going to want to know, okay, so that's an interesting theory about Ezekiel 38, but what about the book of Revelation? Does what you're saying about Ezekiel 38 align itself with the beast empire in the book of Revelation? So let's see. Revelation 17 verses 9 to 14 describe a seven-headed beast that wages war with Messiah, with Yeshua. The seven heads represent seven successive empires that have ruled over the Middle East and that oppressed the nation of Israel. The seventh empire will go away for a time and then re-emerge as the final anti-Messiah empire. Identifying that seventh empire is the key here, because whoever is the seventh empire is also going to be the final beast empire. So let's take a look at the empires in order. The first six historical empires are as follows: Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. But what empire succeeded the Romans in rulership over the Middle East and persecution of the Jewish nation? After Rome came the Islamic Caliphate. It was one of the longest lasting and largest empires in human history. To put its size in perspective, it was around three times as large as the Roman Empire. For the last 600 years of the Caliphate, it was led by the Ottomans, commonly known as, you guessed it, the Turks. After 1300 years of rulership in the Middle East, the Caliphate was formally dissolved in 1920, just over 100 years ago. Now, if this understanding of Revelation 17 is correct, then 1920 is not the last we will see of a Turkish-led Islamic Caliphate. And that's where current events start to seem eerily predicted by Scripture. By the way, the person who taught me the most about this theory is Joel Richardson. If you're looking for a more in-depth understanding about the biblical case for a Turkish-led beast empire, I definitely recommend his book, Mideast Beast. I'll put a link in the description that you can use to find that book if you want to. So let's get into the current events. Are we seeing the restoration of a Turkish-led Islamic Caliphate? I'll explain what's been happening in the Middle East recently, but first you'll need to understand two things about Islam. Number one, a common teaching of Islam is that Allah intends that there be a united Islamic empire called a caliphate that will rule over the entire world. This is essential to understand because it means that most of the 2 billion Muslims in the world today are actually expecting the resurrection of an Islamic caliphate. Many, including political movements, are actively working towards that end. Number two, there are two main groups or denominations, if you will, of Muslims. There are Shia and Sunni Muslims. The main difference between them is their view on who the legitimate leader of that future caliphate will be. Shia Muslims make up around 10% of Muslims worldwide, while the Sunnis make up around 90%. So the Sunnis are the massive majority. And that's where the major shift is happening right now. Iran, a Shia nation, the 10% minority, is losing its power in the region. And Turkey, a Sunni nation, the 90%, is beginning to fill that power vacuum. In recent years, it was Iran that was the primary funder of terrorism in the Middle East. It paid its proxies in Yemen, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Gaza, etc. to do its bidding. Through its proxies, Iran had a massive influence in the Middle East. In fact, its influence was so big that some of the Sunni nations, even though they're not exactly pro-Israel, were even willing to make peace with Israel in the Abraham Accords in order to have a shared defense against Iran. This made sense because Iran was also Israel's primary enemy in the region. For example, it was actually Iran who supported Hamas in their October 7 attack on Israel. And it was Iran's proxies that have been fighting Israel on 7 fronts ever since. But right now, Iran is losing its power in the region because it is losing its proxy war with Israel. Iran's most valuable proxy in the region was Hezbollah, who was considered perhaps even more powerful than Iran's own military. Hezbollah basically controlled Lebanon, and it propped up the Assad regime in Syria, which was, of course, subservient to Iran. But in a short period of time, Israel decimated Hezbollah's leadership and much of its power in Lebanon. With Hezbollah weakened in Lebanon, the Sunni rebel forces in Syria seized their opportunity and ousted Assad from power. But guess who made this possible by backing the Sunni rebels? Yep, it's Turkey. And it's Turkey who has taken large swaths of northern Syria for itself. But is this really part of a plan to reestablish the caliphate or expand the influence of Turkey in the region? Well, I want you to hear it in their own words. The president of Turkey, Erdogan, has said that Turkey is, quote, greater than its borders, and that as a nation we cannot limit our vision to 782,000 square kilometers, in other words, the current territory of Turkey. And about Jerusalem, Erdogan said, in this city that we had to leave in tears during the First World War, it is still possible to come across traces of the Ottoman resistance. So Jerusalem is our city, a city from us. I want you to pay attention there, of course, that he's speaking about the Ottoman resistance. He's referencing that Ottoman Turkish Caliphate. And here's Erdogan claiming that the same way Turkey armed and funded their proxies in Libya and in Azerbaijan, so also they will do in the conflict with Israel.
Nasıl biz Libya'ya girdiysek bunun benzerini aynen onlara da yaparız.
And here is a video of Al-Julani, the leader of the HTS rebel group that has taken over Syria with Turkey's help. And he's claiming that they will first take Damascus and then Jerusalem.
بإذن الله لا نصل فقط دمشق بل إن القدس تنتظرنا بإذن الله تعالى.
And the rebels fighting for him believe the same thing. Here they are found saying, we entered the great Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, then we will enter the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. By the way, Al-Julani was not always called by that name. Julani comes from the word for Golan, and he took on this name to make clear his intentions to invade Israel's Golan Heights. And Julani's rebel group, Hayat Tahrir al-Shams, or HTS, also has a significant meaning. Al-Shams is a reference to the region that they believe will be the first part of the restored caliphate. And it includes Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Turkey, and Israel. So let's summarize. There is a biblical case to be made that a great Middle Eastern alliance will form in the last days under the leadership of the anti-Messiah. According to this theory, this beast empire will attack Israel in the last days, and its leader will be from modern-day Turkey. If Turkey was going to lead the charge against Israel in the last days, we would have to see a major shift in the Middle East, away from the Iranian-led Shia axis and towards a Turkish-led Sunni axis. That very thing has begun to happen. Iran's Shia axis has lost much of its power in the region, and Turkey has begun stepping into that power vacuum, funding its own regional proxies and taking big steps towards its expansionist goals. Turkey is openly pursuing the expansion of its borders and its influence in the wider region, and appears to be pursuing the re-establishment of a Turkish-led Islamic Caliphate. It has made serious threats against Israel, just as we might expect it to do if this theory is correct. But what do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts and to talk with you about it in the comments section below. Here's a couple verses that I hope will encourage you in prayer. And if you learned something valuable from this video, it would mean a lot to me if you'd go ahead and subscribe. By the way, if you want to understand the spiritual epicenter of the conflict in the Middle East, you will need to understand the importance of the Temple Mount, and you can learn about that right here.